so I will call the Housing and Community Development Committee meeting to order for February 15th, 2022. We do our 2 housekeeping motions. So would someone make a motion to suspend the rules to allow the committee members to participate electronically or by phone?
So move.
And is there a second?
Second.
And could we have a roll call for that?
Yes. Chair Ravel,
Aye.
Monica Bobo, Kathy Feingold,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Lauren Berlin,
Aye.
Joanne Salome,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns, Councilmember Reed,
I'm not here yet.
Councilmember Nusma.
Aye. Here. Present.
Great.
Um,
Motion passes.
Yes, the motion to suspend the rules is passed. And if we could have also a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting on January 18th, 2022.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, and another roll call, please.
Chair Ravel,
Aye.
Monica Bobo, Kathy Feingold,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Lauren Berlin,
Aye.
Joanne Salome,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns, Councilmember Reed, Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great. Okay, thank you. So now we can get onto the meat of our agenda. We have 3 pretty interesting items for discussion this evening, and I'm going to just reverse the order of the way they showed on the agenda, so we can go first to hearing the report from the Center for Neighborhood Technology on affordable, resilient housing retrofit program, which is a very detailed set of recommendations for us. And we have with us tonight Kara Pratt, who's our sustainability coordinator, to talk us through that report. And I think it's something that we're going to be wanting to talk about on more than just one occasion, because it's a potential way for us to work on affordable housing, but also sustainable affordable housing. So Kara, why don't we turn it over to you and you can share all your good stuff.
Thank you. I will share my screen. And does this look good to everyone?
Yep, looks fine.
Great. So thank you, members of the Housing and Community Development Committee. My name is Kara Pratt. I'm the Sustainability and Resilience Coordinator for the city. I started just in October. So I will admit that while I'm very familiar with this project and really excited to be working on it, I inherited it completely. And so the final deliverable was submitted in October when I started. And so I hope to be able to answer questions about it, but I might not have all the answers at this time. So with that, let's talk about creating a one-stop shop for affordable, resilient, net zero homes. So this project and report was produced by the Center for Neighborhood Technology in collaboration with Elevate and Muse Community Plus Design, with funding support originally from a grant from 2019 through Partners for Places, which is a project of the Funders Network. And then also there was match funding that came from the Chicago Community Trust and the Evanston Community Foundation. In total, I think the budget for this initial report was $250,000. And so, like I said, this is from 2019 through October of 2021. So almost in its entirety, this project took place during COVID. So this affordable resilient housing retrofit program aims to provide building owners, households, renters, and residents in Evanston with the home improvements they need so that they can seek refuge from the effects of climate change without displacement, so they can stay in place. An emphasis in this report was placed on moderate to low income Black and Latinx Evanstonians, since research indicates that they're especially vulnerable to climate change hazards. And also, this project centers both equity and resilience and sustainability in that it aligns with several of our CARP goals, including 100% renewable energy for all properties by 2030 and a citywide carbon neutrality goal by 2050. Within design of this project itself, there were a number of different steps that were undertaken, and all of these steps also have appendices in the report that I can provide with this group. First, there was a project to undertake social and climate vulnerability mapping. And so essentially the researchers looked at all the different housing types by density within the city of Evanston and compared them based on vulnerability scores, including things like household income, property value, the existence of street trees, and also utility vulnerability, so the energy burden, and 311 flood calls, for example. So they undertook that mapping project, and once they had completed that, they looked at specific property types and properties within those vulnerable zones and assessed them. So during this building assessment pilot, they went into Evanstonians' homes to help identify which types of upgrades would help improve vulnerability. And again, that information in detail is provided in appendices that I can share. Throughout this process, there was an expert advisory group that delivered input. And so those experts were from CDFIs, they were developers, building managers, regulators, several city staff to help improve on the design of this report itself. There was also, despite COVID, pretty robust and authentic community engagement that took place, including stakeholder interviews and documentary screenings about heat islands. And the result of that was a human-centered program design so that we could really address some of the challenges with creating projects like this in the past so that we truly were reaching Evanstonians in how this could be designed. So after all of these projects that took place and all this research, the ultimate recommendation was the creation of a one-stop shop for affordable housing retrofits. And that would address the demand for rehab housing, climate resilient housing, the preservation of affordable housing that already exists, and also to speak to our city's dedication to the reparations program. And then ultimately, the impact and benefits of this one-stop shop would be wealth creation, poverty reduction, the preservation of intergenerational wealth, a huge environmental impact in terms of improving the quality of homes, reducing our carbon footprint at home, and improving community health outcomes as a whole. And this one-stop shop would link together service customers and service providers so that homeowners could directly reach contractors, for example, that were vetted by the city to conduct the projects that they were most interested in their home. So some of the potential upgrades during this building assessment that I mentioned include things like air sealing and insulation, LED lighting, appliance upgrades to Energy Star and water sense levels, converting clothes dryers to heat pumps or electrically fueled clothes dryers, higher efficiency equipment in general, converting water tanks to tankless water heaters, potentially looking into solar on site, stormwater management improvements like native vegetation, planting trees, downspouts, rain gardens. And then also we considered including lead abatement projects. as a potential upgrade as well. So now I'll walk through what this might look like to the average Evanstonian, and this is a deliverable directly of the report to really focus on that human-centered approach. So, for example, we have a resident named Julia. She hears about this program and via text message and clicks learn more. She then is directed to visit the Housing Resource Center, where she speaks to a program representative who answers any questions she has about the program. And then from there, she fills out a short and simple application that lists the program requirements, and she's enrolled. She then works with one program service contact throughout the entirety of her involvement in the program, who is easy to reach, who speaks the language that she speaks, and can answer any of her questions or concerns as she identifies which project she's interested in and works with contractors. From there, she's given an assessment, like I mentioned previously, that will give her essentially a list of home improvement projects that would help address the vulnerability concerns Julia and her family might have. And from there, she can choose which projects she wants to tackle on a short-term basis. And then she's referred to contractors that are pre-qualified with the city who might offer discounted costs for participation in this particular program. So she picks her contractor, decides what project she wants to do, for example, free energy efficient lighting and a solar power discount to save money and reduce her energy burden. And then she decides, after being happy with that, that next year she might consider a rain garden. And then from there, Julia's happy with their experience, so she tells other friends and neighbors, family members about this program, and then the word is spread. Again, this is all part of many appendices that we got associated with this project. Also, within all the recommendations from the Center for Neighborhood Technology, there are included some policy and finance recommendations. So first, the recommendation for the city, if we choose to create this one-stop shop, is to address this in a phased way. So we would first start with a pilot and then over time grow the program into a full-fledged one-stop shop. Something that came up frequently in conversation is the necessity of preserving affordability. So as you all know, retrofits may increase the value of a home, which causes displacement, or a term that I learned, green gentrification. And so it's important to avoid that at all costs, which can be achieved with a number of different tactics, including freezing rents for a number of years, partial tax refund, property tax refunding, and many more different tactics that they recommended to us to make sure that we preserve affordability throughout. Something that also came up in the research is compliance with local codes, ordinances, and construction standards. So the necessity for us to evaluate our own building codes, especially when it comes to electrification and solar permitting. Something else that we should most definitely consider is an equitable workforce development and procurement strategy. And I know that the city is currently working on a plan that would help address that sort of local workforce challenge that we might have. And then the two remaining items include identifying a sustainable funding source through the city of Evanston and making sure that we use different financial products and tools to best reach residents. And so a big reason why we're having this conversation today is we are in the ARPA allocation process, and a direct recommendation of this report is to consider ARPA funding for a proposal like this. And then in terms of financial products, research nationally indicates that loan products are not as widely used as a grant, which might seem obvious to a lot of people, but that's certainly important feedback that we should consider moving forward, that a loan product might not be particularly popular with the folks that we're trying to reach. From there, there are some next steps that we're currently working on. So everything that I talked about up until now is printed out in the report that we received back in October. And then in terms of next steps, we've been having some conversations internally, and unfortunately CNT had some staff changes, and of course we had staff changes as well. So I'm quite new, and we're working on learning about what other communities have done so that we can pursue a similar approach or learn from their lessons learned, and then also identify those initial funding options if ARPA is a logical next step for us, or if there are other sort of combined funding sources that we can consider moving forward. And with that, I will entertain any questions with the caveat that I might not have the answer to all of them.
Actually, Cara, if I can just talk a little bit more about potential funding things that we're trying to figure out if we can wrangle together. We do have our CDBG program, and we can certainly do some of this with CDBG. And really interesting is just yesterday, I got an email from one of the many ones I get from HUD with the HUD Climate Action Plan. So we need to do some looking into this. HUD is saying that this is one of its priorities. This is clearly a change from the Biden administration. And they have 3 goals: increase climate resilience, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and pursue environmental justice. And of course, this is focused on the kind of housing that is funded by HUD. And so it'll be interesting to see if funding follows this, because I think that and this is part of the stuff that is in the Build Back Better bill that has gotten stalled out. But, I think that there is certainly hope that, if we can get a process and a program up and running, then that can make us ready to apply to different sources of funding. And there may be other sources like the Partners for Places. Some of the big foundations are really interested in this kind of thing. In addition, there is funding. In addition to our CDBG, Cook County recently got a large, I think over about 3 million, lead-based paint hazard reduction grant from HUD. CEDA gets all the weatherization funding. It comes through from EPA to DCEO to the CAP agencies. And there is a lot of it. And so all of these are things that normally are done by separate contractors and in separate programs, but there may be a way, I'm not sure, but there may be a way we can actually see if we can get these funds braided together. If we could braid funding together on individual rehabs, it would be really interesting to see how much more we can accomplish faster, and also not, so that's something I want to pursue. And then of course there are just other ways we have to look at, the CDFIs, talk to them, try to see what other opportunities there might be. And we might have different funding options for different people at different income levels. One of the things we've talked about in the past is the Illinois Housing Development Authority's single owner-occupied rehab program, uses forgivable loans. They're, $40,000 max 10-year forgivable loan. And we would love to move our CDBG to that, at least to a forgivable loan, because it is a barrier to people wanting to take on rehab work. And it also helps. We actually want our lower income homeowners to build wealth and equity and be able to create intergenerational wealth. And right now our program doesn't really do that. I mean, it's, 0 interest, deferred payment until you sell your house, but usually that is I mean, that still takes away from any opportunity or some of the opportunity to build for the family to build intergenerational wealth. So those are some of the things that we've been talking about. So I'll be quiet now so you can all ask questions and talk.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kara, for outlining that. It's really an exciting program, I think. So committee members, some comments or questions or thoughts on this report, on this program?
Oh, I have a couple questions. So just so I understand, is it really meant for single family, or like a lot of the affordable housing stock is rental, but it still doesn't change the need for clean air and sustainability and all that? So would the landlord be the one, assuming there's a program, to apply for this? Just sort of curious how exactly I know it's not created yet, but what it would be targeted to, or is that what we're supposed to discuss?
In the study, we really, in the work, because I was one of the people involved in this with Kumar, we very much want to work with both homeowners and landlords or property owners who are renting, because it really is critical that we do both. That's a really good question, Kathy. And that also might provide options. But a lot of what we were looking at were relatively small properties, so it doesn't necessarily get us into certain financing things that we might be able to go after. That's the balancing act. We'll pick your brain on it because you've been involved in finance. So,
Kathy, you said you had a couple of questions?
No, I think that's it for me now.
Okay. Ugo, you have your hand up?
I do. And it is in regards to, just to clarify, this program is for retrofit only, not for just any kind of rehab for anybody. It is, that's my understanding of what you presented, Kara. And sorry, I didn't get a chance to read the final report summary, but I will definitely take a closer look to that summary so I can be more familiar with that next time, if we get a next time to ask questions. And I also noticed a second question is that I noticed that you have lead-based paint abatement as part of the program, but you don't have asbestos. And a lot of our housing is, pre-1970s. So asbestos was still very prevalent in the use by builders. Would there be any consideration to abatement of asbestos as well?
So I'll answer that one first. I think that this program and one-stop shop is meant to address any and all concerns that would emerge in that space. So certainly the program representative that the fictional Julia would be talking to would be able to provide information about any sort of remediation of whether it be asbestos or lead, and connect her with the financial resources that she might be eligible for, either as a homeowner or a renter, depending on the circumstances. So I don't think that we would rule anything out in terms of making housing healthier and more resilient. In terms of your other question, this program is meant to serve folks who are interested in retrofits or home improvement projects in general. So in terms of new construction, I think the city would approach that type of conversation differently, because we have different policy measures and tools to be able to address concerns with new construction in, for example, the electrification space or for installing solar. And those resources, I think, are different, and those conversations would be different compared to someone who already owns a property or lives in a property that they want to improve.
And Ugo, one of the things that CDBG and some funding sources like that would certainly allow is other improvements, because a lot of, actually what the list is pretty comprehensive because, I mean, we do have, we wouldn't just necessarily put in new appliances. If the cabinets are falling off the wall, we want to fix that too. You're right. We have to look holistically at how people live and what they need. But so ideally, we would be able to help with a lot of different types of things, not just the specific things that are the retrofit stuff. There can be one of the weirdest things though is, I remember this, we kept running into even varnish on wood floors that had lead in it and stuff like that. So it's amazing what you end up doing sometimes. It's like, I was always like, oh, I thought it was to make the paint finish so white, but no, it's used everywhere. It's
Wow. Okay. Councilmember Nusma, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Ravel. I'm super excited about this program. This is really kind of complementary to some work that I had done at Citizens Greener Evanston. Councilmember Ravel is very familiar with that. So I want to start by asking about the one-stop shop concept and emphasize the importance of making one phone call and one point of contact. Because my previous experience in this kind of work, there are so many different entities that offer so many different grants and so many different programs that it's overwhelming and confusing, even for people who work in this space. And so if this is at all going to be successful for homeowners or landlords, single point of contact is really, really, really important. And minimizing the decision points that the customer will have to decide, making it as easy as possible for the customer, whether it's a homeowner or a landlord. Just show them the roadmap and let them go. Don't ask them to answer a bunch of questions or make a whole bunch of choices. Not that we're trying to take control away from them, but just make their lives as easy as possible. And so I guess that's what the one-stop shop concept is trying to accomplish. Is that right, Kara?
Exactly. And Sarah might be able to speak more to how that decision was made, but in my experience, you're exactly right, Councilmember Nusma, that's definitely the best approach to take, is to make things easy as possible.
Yeah, so I would say don't give them a list of 5 plumbers to call and 3 solar contractors to call. Let's make it as easy as possible if we want to accomplish the end objectives of climate action here. So that's one point I wanted to make, and that is kind of tied in with funding. And Sarah, you mentioned kind of braiding funding sources together. So maybe this is 2 sides of the same coin here. And if we can create one funding source, at least from the end user's perspective, it's funding coming from the city, we get it from a multiple channels. But if it's all coming through us, and then we can make it as easy as possible for the homeowners. And we're not telling them to go here for this and there for that and there for the other thing. One stop is super duper important.
Yeah.
You mentioned the fact that loans are probably not super attractive, which probably rules out PACE financing, but I'm just wondering if that was at all talked about or considered. And for those of you who don't know, PACE, P-A-C-E, property assessed clean energy financing, is essentially a way of financing renewable energy or energy efficiency improvement and paying it back through a little bit of a line item adder on your property tax bill.
I think if a resident is interested in a loan product, then certainly this hypothetical program would entertain that option. My understanding is that just the research indicated that certainly grants, especially for the demographic that we're trying to reach, are typically much more attractive to people than a loan product.
Okay, because it would take considerable time, energy, and effort and political will to set up PACE financing. Last I checked, I'm not even sure if it was completely yet functionally established at the state level. It requires state So if we're saying that loans are not, probably the way that folks want to go, it's probably not worth the effort to get PACE in place for this particular initiative. Does that make sense to folks?
I think so, at least, especially we want to start off focusing on lower income people, but at some point, the one stop could be expanded, hopefully, to offer options to people that we may not be able to, we're not going to be able to give loans to everybody. So in other words, I think we're going to have to income qualify people. And many of these sources require income levels that really won't serve many people in Evanston. But I'm interested in at some point just finding out more about that, because that's not something I'm particularly familiar with. And I think that we got to look at everything and see what we can figure out.
Yeah. Okay. Let's maybe follow up on that separately, but
Yeah.
this particular initiative, that's probably a C priority.
Right.
Want to ask about solar a little bit. So Kara, are we only considering on-site solar here, or what about the possibility of community solar?
I think all of our existing community solar information and also future community solar initiatives would be a part of the conversation that the fictional Julia would have if she was.
Yeah. So I would venture to guess that most of the Julias we're talking with would not be in the market for rooftop solar because they live in an apartment or it's a shaded roof or whatever. So having a community solar option as part of this one-stop shop package is probably pretty important. For those of you who don't know, community solar is kind of a misnomer. Don't be misled by the name, but what it allows is for people who can't put solar panels on their own roof for whatever reason, including they don't own their own roof, they can subscribe to a solar project that's built out in the boonies somewhere and basically buy electricity from that solar project at a cheaper price than they'd be paying to come in. So that's something it's something available to everybody here in Evanston now, regardless of income qualification. Do it if you're so inclined, but let's make sure that's part of the package for this initiative too. If we are talking rooftop solar, Kara, you mentioned solar permitting, and this is not the time and place to go into a deep dive about the solar app program, but let's just make sure we're following up on that. This is a program developed by a federal agency that's intended to be adopted by communities throughout the country, kind of a common platform, common application that makes life a lot easier for solar installers who are facing this. It's not something different in each town. It's the same procedure for each jurisdiction, which we make their lives easier. It brings the cost down, and it makes life easier for city staff as well, because there's training and back end, and kind of expedites the solar permitting process. So, and then one other question, does this initiative contemplate energy assessments on the front end, like energy audits with blower door, infrared camera? Is it that fancy, or just kind of a walk around visual inspection?
I'm not sure the degree of complexity for those assessments in the past, but certainly in my experience, for any educated insulation upgrades that would be recommended, you would have to do a pretty comprehensive energy audit for the building. So I think it should be,
And
that would tell the tenant or property owner a lot of information about what could be done in turn, including the return on investment, which is an important calculation that I didn't get into in this presentation, but
right.
it would essentially give you a list of upgrades or recommendations in terms of the projects themselves, and then also their initial cost and their payback over time.
Right. And I think that could be extremely important to our landlords with smaller buildings. And I would really like to see us able to work with those sizes of buildings, because many of them are, older construction. And in fact, in many cases, we have a lot of 2-flats in Evanston that are converted homes, they're frame homes or whatever. And I think that is, realistically, that is our largest source of, quote, naturally occurring affordable housing is generally in buildings of 4 or fewer units. And so that's something that I think would be really, and also plays into our efforts to support small landlords, that we've got another topic on that. But I think that is something that we really want to see if we can do, because it can make a real difference in. Now, obviously, I'm just going to use one census tract as an example, because it's the one that we have identified with the lowest life expectancy, and that is 8092, which is our census tract. It's the 5th ward, pretty much west of Green Bay Road. So Church Street, roughly to north to where McCormick and Green Bay meet, and then along the canal and down Green Bay. That census tract, people living there have a 13-year shorter lifespan expectancy than our highest lifespan expectancy, which is 88, I think, our far northeast census tract. And a lot of that, the quality of housing has a huge impact on that. And things like, and this was something that HUD for many years, air conditioning was a luxury. Well, air conditioning is not a luxury, and it's important to get homes and apartments air conditioned. It has huge, it's very important to people who have underlying health conditions or chronic health conditions like asthma and stuff, and that's more common in our lower income populations and also in our African American and our Latino population. So, a lot of those things really, really do matter, and we need to address them, because that's our equity lens. We have to.
Last thing I want to say or want to ask about is, what kind of outreach would we do? How would we make people aware of this program and bring them into it? How are we going to get customers?
I think that has to be worked out, and I think we have to try to, as Kara said, Center for Neighborhood Technologies has had some changeover in staff. We need to get back together with them and start talking about sort of the scale of a pilot. And one of the things is, this isn't necessarily going to be city staff who would be the pilot. It may be better not to be. So there are a lot of decisions that we'll have to make. But what we really wanted to do was get to this committee and see if this is something that you endorse as something that we move forward and really try to pursue. And then Kara is setting up meetings and stuff, and then we will hope to come back with a timetable of sort of next steps. It is not going to be immediate, but I do think it is one of the most important things that we can be doing with housing to address inequities for people who are already housed here. And I think it is very, very important.
Just thought of one other thing, and not to overcomplicate this, but this is also potentially a workforce development opportunity.
Yes.
Doing a lot of weather stripping and insulation. We need more folks to do that work. And so there is a workforce development opportunity there.
Yes, and the rebuilding warehouse is a potential source. One of the things we've talked about is oftentimes we have a lot of discussion of getting people into union kind of construction. But the reality is, when you look at Evanston, right in Evanston and the immediate surrounding communities, residential construction through rehab and things like that is a huge, you just look at our permit numbers. it's enormous. And I think it can be a very good way to get people employed. And my understanding is we have a labor shortage and a skilled labor shortage for that type of market. So that's something, in fact, that's something Michael McLean and I were discussing. He was a developer that, of 1815 Ridge is his most recent, and then 1571 Maple. And he's been on our MWEBE committee, and he was talking about, how can we get people into construction? And of course, we have our water department looking at more things. And one of those may be a lead service line replacement program, which could be another, which is again, a critical thing that we need to do. And one of the interesting things is because I was reporting on it to the Treasury, because it was one of our first accomplishments with ARPA funding. In 2021, Council had approved $3 million for water projects. And so the water main replacements were how that funding was used. And there was a stretch of water main on Foster that was replaced, and the offer was made to all of the owner occupants to have their lead service line replaced for free as part of that. And not everybody took us up on that, which was a disappointment. And I know that our council member did a great deal of outreach, and our former council members. So, we also still have, and that's maybe why this won't be residing in the city. We may need it to reside outside the city, the one stop, to really engage people, to the, some of the people who are resistant to what's the city up to.
I just want to quickly respond to that. That really the issue, I went out and got people to sign up for the lead pipe replacement program. The issue was there was an additional step after that. So, and I communicated this today, Stoneback, if we were to go out and right then and there, have people able to sign something and complete all the paperwork they need to right then and there without an additional step afterwards, we would have a lot of success. So there's ways around it.
That's very helpful to know. Thank you. I hadn't heard that before.
That kind of, that's what I'm saying about one-stop shopping.
Yep.
All right, I'm done. I'll let someone else talk.
Thank you, because I was going to say Lauren's been waiting a long time to.
Thanks. So I have a couple of things, and Kara, I'll just run through them and then you can respond as you choose. The first I want to say is super exciting. And Kara, specifically, you did a great job. That was very linear and clear, and I really appreciated the information. A couple of comments and a couple of questions. On the question side, I would be curious to know, especially in light of the information Sarah just gave us on the average life expectancy and various census tracts in our town, I'd be curious to know if there's any talk of constraining the pilot geographically. It seems to me like that would make a lot of sense to focus very narrowly on a census tract that we know is confronting these issues every day, as evidenced by that distressing difference in life expectancy. My next, and obviously the town already does that with some other things, census tract, I mean. My next question is so two things in terms of what Councilmember Newsma said. I was also thinking that there's a workforce development component here, but I was thinking also about, in some respects, if we're looking at trying to address some of these issues, maybe we also want to try as much as possible to have service providers be either providers of color or from within the communities, to the extent that those are options. I think as we think about who would be vetted to provide the services, that's a real opportunity to also think through what we're saying and what opportunities we're creating for people. I do disagree with the idea that we would not give multiple choices. I think consumers benefit from being able to price these services, and I understand that we don't want it to be a complicated process. I totally get that, but I would be reluctant to not provide multiple providers. Also, the last things I wanted to say are, if there's any talk of compromising between a grant and a loan, at least as it relates to landlords, if there could be some sort of match where, the way the city matches in some instances for paving alleys, if there would be a match as a compromise. I don't know how to say this very politically correct, so I'm just going to say it with the hope that everyone knows I have good intentions. I would be hesitant to give a grant to a slumlord and effectively reward their negligence, right? And on the flip side, that's exactly the type of property that you would actually want to get retrofitted, because it's probably those residents whose needs are most neglected. So I understand that that's tricky, but I am really uncomfortable with that as an idea. If a homeowner wants to neglect their property, that's a different thing, but a landlord, you know? So I want to throw that out there. And then on the issue of green displacement, I'm not an expert on green displacement, but I work in affordable housing and I'm familiar with the broader idea of displacement and gentrification. You know, I would be curious. The one thing that always concerns me with that is someone also deserves the right to do what they want with their property. So if they get it retrofitted, it appreciates in value, they choose to sell it for whatever reason, it's still now a more environmentally secure property. So I just don't know like what it means to say we want to avoid green displacement. Yeah. So I don't know if there's anything to respond to or not, but I wanted to throw all those points out there as things I've been thinking about as I've been listening. And thanks again.
Thank you.
I can respond to the question of sort of the split incentive and who benefits from upgrades. So in my previous job, I managed a city's lead pipe replacement program. And this came up a lot in terms of why are we giving landlords free lead pipe replacement when they often fall under the category of being labeled slumlords and they don't necessarily take care of their properties. And what I told my colleagues in that situation is ultimately we need to look out for the best interest of the tenants. And so when we, in that case, mandated lead pipe replacement, it was to protect tenants from landlords who wouldn't otherwise replace their lead service lines. And so I know that it can seem like we're offering a slew of benefits to the property owner, and that might not be deemed to be a fair process. Ultimately, what I'm interested in is making sure that the person who lives there, the tenant, is having healthy and safe housing. And so I totally understand where you're coming from, and I've heard that a lot, but I think that we as a city just really need to look out for the people who live in that property, and some things that we can do to make sure that the landlord doesn't just turn around and raise rents and kick out their tenants is to have those programs where we would think about freezing rents for a period of time. And I'm sure that Sarah and her team have a lot more expertise about how we can avoid those situations.
Generally, when we are doing any kind of rental property, we have some kind of income restrictions, but to keep some affordability. But one of the things that I think is very important and very challenging for our small buildings, especially, is at one point we were talking about limiting all units that when we were talking about a different city program to 60% of area median. So say you had a 2-flat, both units would have to be at 60%. One of the challenges is that sometimes the building won't even cash flow because we have really quite high property taxes. So that is a real challenge. And one of the things that I like about the CDBG program is if you have a 2-flat, you only need one of those units income eligible at all. And we, interestingly enough, most of the 2-flats we've ever rehabbed with CDBG are owner occupied, and the owner qualified as income eligible and was allowed to rent to whatever they could get or command. And so we have to look at that very carefully because it is a huge challenge because we don't do much, we don't control the bulk of the property taxes. So that is really a challenge for us. But one other real quick note, sorry, is what our experience has been is even with the CDBG program, most of the landlords that perhaps had way more code violations and weren't cooperative and stuff like that, that we frequently didn't want to touch any kind of funding where we were income qualifying anything or putting any kind of restrictions. So that's an interesting challenge. Sometimes I don't think we're going to get people like that taking us up on a broader program. But, you know, Kara is right. We do want to deal with things like lead-based paint, you know, lead pipes and stuff. So, and get those fixed. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, Councilmember Burns, your turn.
Sorry about that. Yeah, and just a quick response to one thing that Lauren said, which I appreciate her bringing it up about slumlords. I mean, one is a slumlord just shouldn't be welcomed in Evanston either. We shouldn't even they shouldn't even be here. And that's, you know, something that we're working on, you know, on the Plan and Development Subcommittee, you know, recommendation from our property standards manager is to adopt the landlord licensing for this very reason, because it would, it provides an enforcement mechanism that disallows slumlords to be able to rent units here in Evanston instead of finding them, which what we found is most people either ignore the fines or they're happy to pay it. So I just want to be clear that through landlord licensing, which we're reviewing in that committee, as well as other strategies, I think we make Evanston a place where slumlords cannot do business. But thank you for calling attention to that, Lauren. That's really important. So I think this is a really good fit for something that we're looking at in the Here to Stay committee, which is a kind of a community working group I put together in the 5th Ward. And one of the things we're looking at is potentially creating a housing authority, an Evanston based local housing authority, to do some small scale affordable housing development, but more so to focus on exactly the things that I think we'll need to focus on to get this right, which is really strong customer service. I think I'm going to use a term that organization that I recently put in connection with refers to it as credible messengers, which is people that have a lot of social capital in the community. And sometimes we overlook these people. We see them as those receiving services instead of providing them. And so I really want to make a push to hire more people locally who have that social capital, who have those relationships and the trust already built up in the community because they're from here, they live here. And let's employ those people to be our frontline workers as we look to advance our affordability work, our retrofitting work. Let's put those folks on the front line. They're here, they need the work, and they'd be happy to do it. And I think more effective than people outside of Evanston. So I think this would be something that is a good fit for a concept, again, we're exploring to create a housing authority in Evanston. And so as we continue to look into this, I think it will align with the research we're doing, and hopefully at some point we can invite that committee to this committee and discuss some of our research. We're still early on in it, but again, I think this would be a good fit for it. And then lastly, I had a working group meeting that ended a little late, a working group of the Reimagining Public Safety Committee. But if Kara, you could speak briefly to the equitable workforce development and procurement, and again, this could be a much more abbreviated version, but I'm really just interested to know how much, realistically, how much funds or what type of support we can expect through some of the opportunities you cited here. I see the Illinois Climate and Equitable Jobs Act and some other sources. I'm just trying to get a sense of how much support is there, how much funding is there, and is there, if we really want to realistically, train people to do this retrofitting here in Evanston, but as Sarah always brings up, which is a great point, also just in the kind of northern suburban area, is there a need for us to commit any local funds to get that done?
So I think the theory behind this, Councilmember Burns, is to have a list of pre-qualified contractors who the city would be able to recommend who might conduct this work. And so ideally, on that pre-qualified list, there would be local contractors who will have specialized skills in these fields. In terms of funding for the actual development of the workforce and the training itself, that's not something that the scope of this report is contemplating in detail. But I think it expects that once there is a full-fledged workforce development plan or policy, that it would be aligned with the type of projects that we're considering. So for example, I think it would be really lucrative for a workforce development plan to focus on lead pipe replacement, because that is going to be a problem for years and years and years. And there's already a lack of contractors who are specialized in that work, because it combines the expertise of plumbing with the expertise of excavating. And there are not a lot of plumbers who also excavate. So that would just be an example of a crossover recommendation for any sort of workforce plan that's developed, to say, hey, let's get Evanstonians in this excavation and plumbing trade so that we can encourage them to be hired through this program. So I know that doesn't speak to the details that we might be looking for, but we would just sort of seek to hire those people under the understanding that they hopefully one day will exist locally.
No, that's helpful. I think I would imagine you've met with Nathan Norman to kind of describe the opportunity here.
Not yet, or at least I haven't, but that's on my list. I'm
Okay.
meeting with him tomorrow about childcare though. Childcare workers. I mean, I've got things lined up for Nathan.
Yeah, I would just bring him in early, because I think it's something similar to lead pipe replacement, which for those who kind of follow the city, I've made several referrals, and Dave and I are working on, there's kind of two different lead pipe programs. There's one that will really rely on contractors to hire Evanston residents, and another option that I've recommended that Dave, we're going to talk about, I think at the next AMPW meeting, that allows our city workers to train people to do a portion of the lead replacement work, which we'll talk about more. But yeah, I think it's important to kind of get Nathan in early on, and because if there's a way that we can use ARPA funds to support this work, I think that's what ARPA funds is meant for. Folks have heard me talk a lot about the need for kind of a strategy and a plan for ARPA. My biggest concern is that on projects like this, right, where we have this huge runway, we have this huge opportunity to create jobs for decades. I want to make sure that we have the funds to commit to training people to do the work, so we don't miss out on this opportunity. And I'd like to know what that price tag is first before we commit all our ARPA funds to other equally, good, I can't say equally, but good projects, but not necessarily something that is a higher priority than ensuring that we have a local workforce that could do some of the sustainability and retrofitting work that we know is going to employ people for decades, similar to how lead pipe replacement will employ people for decades. So I just want to give you a little bit of context on that. So, but I work with Nathan or follow up with Nathan on this, and Sarah, hopefully you have a good conversation with him. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody on the committee that we haven't heard from with a question or a comment? I guess I'd like to go back to, I think something, Sarah, maybe you mentioned at the very beginning, which is the question of whether we should be asking for ARPA funds for the CNT program. You mentioned that there are potentially a number of other sources, HUD money, et cetera, but right now we do have the opportunity to earmark some ARPA funds, at least to get this pilot program going. And I was wondering whether you or Kara or anybody has an idea what that price tag, what should we be asking for to make sure, to make sure that this program gets going in a very meaningful way.
I don't have that yet. And I don't know that Kara has had the time to even dig into that, but that is one of the things we do want to talk to CNT and other experts who worked on this for us, but that is a key thing. What I'd like to do is with the endorsement, and that's not a vote or anything, but with the endorsement of this committee, you know, really start digging into this with the expectation of putting together a request for ARPA. I don't know the exact time frame, but you know, it is one of the things in that housing bucket that I have in there because you know, it's just I don't know enough about organizing this type of a one-stop to be able to provide a budget, but I think we can get one pulled together and what the initial things we need to fund are while we're searching and trying to figure out our you know, where other sources may be coming for some of the work. I really see there's going to be basic money needed just to staff and, you know, have the location, where should it be, you know, all that kind of stuff. All of that has to be, we've got to work on all that and come back with a recommendation.
Okay, great. Councilmember Newsma. You have a comment on that?
I just wanted to throw out the possibility or put it out there that the possibility of using TIF money from the new Fifth Ward TIF for properties in that boundary.
Yes, that is absolutely something that is one of the other sources that I have on my list for the ones that are within that boundary, because it really, you know, we made a commitment that we would invest TIF money in affordable housing, and I think that's very important. And there, you know, kind of two main ways. It can be new construction of housing, which we also see opportunities, but it really can be for improving the quality of our existing stock. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what about reparations money? Would that be worth considering?
Well, what we've said is, so far with reparations, because the only other source we had at the time was, we made it clear that reparations money could be layered with any city funding or available funding, as far as we're concerned. That is, you know, in other words, it never cut anybody out. It wouldn't be like, oh, you got reparations, so now you're not eligible for this. But one of the things that we had to say is, with that come some of the other restrictions. For example, this is where SEPA comes in on helping with reparations. If somebody wanted to combine their reparations funding with CDBG for which they're eligible, that would have to then be managed. The project would have to be managed by the rehab specialist, you know, SEPA's construction specialist, just because CDBG is not something that your average resident can comply with. It's just crazy. So, but we absolutely, I think we want to let people layer that money in if it's appropriate. I mean, I think that's absolutely a goal.
Kathy, back to you.
Thanks. I'm just curious if there's similar models like this around the country, or is this really a new initiative that was sort of created from scratch?
I think it's very novel. I know that some other communities have been having the same conversation, but as soon as I started, I got emails from my counterparts in different cities about this and asking about this. So, and CNT has as well. So there's a lot of attention to projects like this. I know Oak Park has started to think about this, and I know Ann Arbor is also really interested in this project.
Hot topic, but nobody's got it figured out yet, is I think what it amounts to. Maybe we can be a pilot and show the world how it can be done.
I would also say continue conversations with those other cities.
Absolutely.
Best practices, because
Mm-hmm.
you never know where you're going to find a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Well, committee, this is obviously not going to be the only time we talk about this really exciting program. I think I can speak for the committee to say that there's a lot of enthusiasm for it, and we certainly want to make sure there's ARPA funding for it, and other sources that we can manage to find that would really work for the program, and really want to make sure it gets off to a good start. I hope CNT is getting its back in place so we can really start moving forward with this, because it's, our existing housing stock is a huge source of the greenhouse gas emissions that we need to be cutting to zero. And so this is really an important program to address that, as well as making our housing more healthier for the residents. There are a whole lot of reasons that this is a really exciting program. Well, thank you, Kara, and we look forward to chatting with you again. And I think, Rennie, we have a couple more items on our agenda that are also going to need some discussion from the committee. So let's move on to the guidance for staff on how best to survey the opinions and experiences of landlords and tenants who are being referred to the Metropolitan Tenants Organization and the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. And this is a referral that came from Councilmember Burns. And we talked about it a little bit when we discussed approving or recommending approval of the renewal of the contract for the MTO. But, and I know Councilmember Burns, I think you've been talking with Sarah some further about this, and we had a memo in the packet that sort of outlined there are a lot of things to consider as we talk about how to do some kind of a survey of people who are using that service. So Sarah, do you want to talk?
Yes, that would.
I was going to move the discussion. I moved the discussion.
Oh, thank you. We need a second.
Okay.
We've got a second. Thank you. So what we've done is we've kind of taken this step by step. The first thing we were asked to do was make sure that 311 was capturing contact information, not just transferring people through by phone. And Marianne did most of the legwork on this, and our 311 people are great. We found out that they are doing that in by far the most cases. But one of the things we also found out is that 30% or less of the calls come through our 311. A great many of the calls and contacts go direct to MTO. So, we can get people's contact information. It's just then what are our next steps? So what we'd really just like to is really talk about is direction on what those might be, which is really a sort of a clarification of what we're evaluating or what we're looking at evaluating, because it would really affect how any surveys would be done. There are a lot of issues about surveys. Surveys are not an easy thing. It was very interesting. Sue Pontarelli, who's our 311, runs 311s, we met with her and Yvette, and Sue went, oh, surveys are not within my area of expertise. And you can see the complications. Marianne has actually done a lot of work with this sort of thing, far more than I. But I do think that we could measure something and really get some feedback on something like timeliness of response. And we can talk about that sort of thing. But when we get into trying to, depending on what we're trying to answer, a survey may not be the best thing to use, depending on what, I'm going to use an example. Like if you think of the types of things somebody might call or contact MTO for, like I want to get out of my lease early. What should I do? And they'll give them all the right steps to try to take to get out of the lease to, how you ask and stuff like that. But the landlord might say, sorry, unless you can sublease, I can't, it might not accomplish what the tenant might most want, which is just like, no problem, I'll let you walk away. But if you survey them, depending on how you do a survey, it might come up like, I didn't get any help at all. Well, some things aren't really within the capacity of MTO or even Lawyers Committee for Better Housing to really resolve for them. So I think the question is, how can we do a survey that will get information on something that, is useful and tells us at least, as I say, the simplest things are people being contacted rapidly. That is a really important thing that you pointed out, Councilmember Burns, and that doesn't always, are people getting contacted? And then there are perhaps other ways, depending on if we think there are issues with specific types of things that we may want to try to do discussions or one-on-ones or something like that. I don't know. We don't have any solution for that. We just want to hear more from everybody on what we might be trying to accomplish. But we can get their information.
And Chair, after Sarah goes, if I could just frame this as the person who made this referral, I just want to make sure we're framing this in the way that you made the referral.
Mm-hmm.
And Sarah, sorry to cut you off. I thought you would wrap it up, but if
no, go ahead.
I just wanted to bring us back that really, I think the way we should look at this is, we were just asked to approve the extension of a contract for MTO without any information about how tenants or landlords feel about the service that they're providing. And so I really want us to start from that place. Like, we had no information. And so therefore, going from there, what type of information would everyone want the next time we're asked to extend a contract from MTO or Open Communities or any other organization? So I just wanted to kind of preface the discussion with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's all for now. I have some other things, but I want to hear from everyone else first.
Well, Lauren, let's go to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because one of my questions, thanks, Councilmember Burns, because one of my questions was just like, can we level set on the context here? I remember that conversation, but the point I'm still confused on is, have we decided that we are doing a survey? And the question now is, what are we surveying? Or is there still a conversation to be had around whether or not to do a survey and the pros and cons of doing a survey? So if we can just get that clarified, and then.
From our standpoint, we were coming back with the first step, and we really want input from you all.
But the first step, meaning the decision has been made to do.
No, just that the question was, is the information being captured that would allow us to potentially do surveys? That was the first question, the way the referral was framed.
Okay, so the question on the table is, the overarching question here sounds like, do we have a method of accountability for ensuring the quality of services from NTO and the Lawyers Committee? If so, what is it? If not, what do we need? And what would it look like to create a method of accountability, right? That's like the bigger piece we are talking about here. And so a survey has been brought forward, but it's open. Am I correct that it's open, or no? I'm just trying to understand where we are.
That synergy experience is the direct experience of people who actually are using.
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah, no, it has to be the receiver.
Because we kind of started with a deficit in a sense, like, oh, well, people won't be able to articulate their position without this kind of layer of anger and frustration, which I understand that may be true, but I don't want it to get lost that I think it's important that these are adults. I think they can handle themselves in most cases. If we provide the right context, they can explain what they're experiencing, and they know the difference between just a process that took longer than they anticipated, or compared to bad customer service, for example. So
no, I get that. Of course, we have to survey the clients, customers, because customers are the only people who can tell us if it's going well or not, right? I'm just trying to understand where we
it's open. I love if you have some other idea, certainly from, as the person who made the referral, I'd love to just hear about, again, like you said, different methods of accountability, of hearing from, getting feedback from, from landlords and tenants. So I'd love to, I think it's still open.
Yeah, it's just, okay, I just want to make sure I understand where we are in terms of what's available to us.
Right, I'd say we're at the very beginning of the conversation, and, so if there are other ideas besides a traditional kind of survey that would get the kind of information that we're looking for, then we want to think about that as well. So Lauren, do you have any initial thoughts about?
No, I want to think about it. I mean, I don't know the demographics enough in Evanston specifically, but I know that generally speaking, when you're talking about a population of tenants that are potentially low income and feel vulnerable, it's delicate if you want to preserve trust and safety, their sense of safety and their willingness to be involved. So I'm just thinking about, how to get feedback without discouraging participation in the program and getting services to people.
And I think the memo from staff,
it did touch on that.
On a lot of those.
It did touch on a lot of that. So that's why I was trying to figure out if a survey is happening or if we're just thinking about accountability and ways to do it.
Yep. So I'd say the answer is we're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ugo, do you have some thoughts about how to go about this?
Well, perhaps. And first, I would like to say that to me, surveys have lost all kind of credibility across the board. You buy toothpaste and they want to know what you think, what's the price, whatever question they want to ask you, to then manipulate it. So as a rule, I ignore surveys completely. It doesn't matter where they come from. Even if it's from my industry, I think that that has lost a lot of credibility given the manipulation that surveys are given at the end. But I think that perhaps a way to approach this could be, and it might be a little bit more labor intensive, but if the city goes back to the recipients of the service, if somehow we get a list of the people that uses the MTO for resolution of issues that they have as a tenant landlord type of situations. And even if they receive no satisfactory given the background that Sarah gave us, that they didn't receive a complete satisfaction, but were they listened to, were they directed to the right person to talk to, questions of that nature, but on a more personal basis. If they're sent a formatted survey, we might be ignored by 95% or 99% of the people who receive the surveys. But if I get a phone call and I being left a message, if I don't pick up the call, then 95% of the time, I return that call, unless it's something that I'm really not interested on. But I think that given that somebody paid attention to my issue and then had the motivation to call me and find out how it went, I am pretty sure that we'll get a much stronger response than just a survey. Just a thought to the survey thought.
Okay. Joanne?
Well, I want to know how does the city currently review organizations that they have contracts with before they're brought up for renewal? Is there a procedure?
I think it's usually we look at, how many residents were served. It's a numerical kind of thing, not a qualitative kind of thing. And I think Councilmember Burns is interested in a more qualitative result.
Well, I just wondered what's currently being done, and hopefully would be some qualitative in there. And also, do these two organizations also reach out to their past clients for reviews on performance? Do we get that kind of information if they do it?
Yeah.
They have.
Real quick, I just want to comment on our last thing she just said. What's been my experience, and I'm new, so it might be different. So Councilmember Ravel, correct me if you've done something wrong, but all we get is a presentation from the provider. And that's all we get is kind of their interpretation of how they're doing. At least that's been my experience since I've been on the council.
But have we asked them if they survey their clients, you know?
I have talked with John Bartlett about it in the past, and they have, I don't know how recently, and I expect probably in the last couple of years, there hasn't been a whole lot of this type of outreach, but they had tried doing some surveys and follow up and had frequently just not a lot of response. And one of the things that we did have a discussion with John about this, and he's not at all opposed to trying to determine, I mean, he's not resisting trying to evaluate how effective, how useful the program is and stuff like that. But they have had a lot of people who just don't recontact you, or you won't call back, or don't answer. I don't remember what I think at the time, and this was, I think, when we early on when we contracted with them, that my original discussion was. And one of the things that in our discussion, both Marion and John said, you are more likely to get people to at least look at a text. And one of the things that happens with a lot of our lowest income people, and I was on a meeting discussing LIHEAP applications, which is, utility assistance. And one of the things is people hate being left on hold because they have many of them have limited message units and things like that. And so it's not always easy to get people to respond. So they had tried, but had not had a great deal of what they would consider success getting anything really meaningful. That doesn't mean they're not open to looking at other ways if we have other ways and working with us, because we discussed that. And we asked whether or not they would provide names and contact information of people who called them directly. And that's a little bit awkward because technically those people who have not gone through our system, MTO would have to first ask for their permission to reach out, to have anybody else reach out to them. I know that seems weird, but it isn't. I mean, that is a common requirement.
Councilmember Nusma.
Thank you, Chair Ravel. A couple of points. Number one, if what we're trying to do is just gauge the effectiveness of these services, let's keep in mind we don't need 100% participation. We just need a representative sample. And so let's not aim for 100%. I don't know statistically what that representative sample would be, but we don't need perfection here. We just need to hear from enough that we get a good picture. I would like to suggest as a possibility the Zen City platform, which the council members may be familiar with and staff members may be familiar with. The city subscribes to this service that does data mining through social media, through news media, and it's also integrated with the city's 311 system. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know that Zen City does have the capability of doing kind of targeted outreach, proactive outreach surveys, in other words. And since they do have the 311 data, maybe a Zen City survey, which could be conducted at relatively low cost, might be a way to gather some good information. And as I understand it, Zen City does have some staff that can help us, frame the questions. So I'll throw this out as a possibility.
We'll look into that.
Is important.
Lauren.
So I was also thinking about the point of random sampling before Congressman Newsom mentioned it. And so a couple of thoughts in no specific order.
Council member, not congressman. Don't.
Oh, congressman. Sorry. Council member. I said congressman. Sorry. I'm sorry.
You got a promotion.
I was doing research earlier today on, okay. So anyways, in terms of random sampling, I've been thinking about that too. And I'd actually been thinking that we could just focus on people coming through 311, and that would be a sample population. So that might sort of get us around this, whatever we do, that gets us around this hurdle of having to ask permission, because it's still 1 in 3. It's Evanston residents. I also would say, just things I'm thinking about, maybe we do try to do this. I think that makes a lot of sense to have accountability with our service providers, but maybe we do it on a go forward basis as opposed to retroactively. I think it might be a lot easier to do something like renew the contract and have a plan so that people who are called in the coming year, like renew it for 1 year and then survey people during this coming year, rather than asking people retroactively, especially because if housing situations are tenuous, it's just a lot to ask people to dig up given the very complicated nature. So I'm not saying let's let a service provider off the hook or take them at their word or anything. I'm just saying let's maybe go, let's not perfect be the enemy of good, right? So I would suggest that as a possible go forward strategy. And I also really agree with what Ugo was saying about a call. So maybe a compromise would be, personally, the idea of learning any other platform sounds horrible to me. Like, I feel like, the less we introduce more platforms, the better. But maybe there's a simple text, like however they communicated with 311 initially, they get like this 1 or 2 question survey back that basically finds out if they're happy with the service. And if not, then we do a follow-up call to find out why, because this is a really complicated set of things that have to happen. You can have MTO or the lawyers doing a great job. It can still take 6 months. The landlord can still not give them the outcome the tenant wants, or vice versa, right? And so we do need the opportunity into Councilman, not Congressman Burns' points. These are adults. They can talk to us about the experience, and they can talk to us about what's working and what's not. And we need to respect that, right? The center it on the client. At the same time, we need adequate opportunity to find out what happened. And a yes, no, or 1 to 5 scale is not really going to tell us what we need to know. So if someone says yes, they're happy, we take them at their word. If someone says no, we invest a little bit more resources to try to find out what's actually going on and get a clearer picture. So that's what I would say, and only do it on a go forward basis, and just use 311 and just assume it's a random sample.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Burns.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lauren. And I just want to say that I also think that if we promote this as an opportunity, and have the city promote it as an opportunity and encourage people to call 311, that we'll likely see an increase in usage. So as far as I can tell, I haven't seen a ton of information going out in any of our newsletters about this on an ongoing basis. And I think it is something that we should ramp up, considering that we probably, do have a lot of predatory things going on. And then also just landlords who need some kind of support and assistance. So I think it's a good start, as Councilman Newsman and Lauren said, it's a good start. I think it's a representative sample. I've seen, even citywide, Chicago-wide, statewide, surveys or polls done with 300 people as a sample size. So I think this is a good group, and one that we also can increase. The first I want to start off though is saying that I think we do this a lot in the Social Services Committee. And Sarah, I'm wondering what your take is on this, but can we put together maybe a subcommittee or a working group to discuss this further? It's been an effective way to kind of nail down some of the specifics around these type of decisions. And I mean, it's good that we're bringing it to the full committee, but I just wanted to start off there because I don't want us to feel like we don't have enough time to really dig into this some more.
I don't have a problem with that. I think I would very much like it to keep it to 2 people, because we had what was a working committee turn into extra committee meeting, and that I mean, and I think that we have some people who sound like they're very knowledgeable and thoughtful about this, and I think, you know, if we can figure something out, that would be great. I guess it's a question of resources and willingness to be on working committees.
And are we limited to two in this committee as well, based on
Yes, without getting into open meetings and stuff, and we really cannot manage a whole lot of more committee meetings, because that's what, as I said, is happening with the Social Services Committee. We've already added a special meeting.
And for this particular topic, perhaps just, you know, two committee members
And a staff person.
staff person, and probably 1 or 2 sessions would be
Right.
because I mean, I think this committee's given a lot of good suggestions, and so yeah, we could make it a pretty compact kind of effort, initiative. I mean, whatever.
Yeah, that works. And we've had a similar, you know, 2-person on the Social Service Committee, subcommittee on the Social Services Committee too, so that works. The other thing I just wanted to say is that I don't think this will discourage participation. You have to understand that this group is actually a more vocal group, right? They're advocating for themselves by calling a 311, by calling an MTO. You know, I've taken on some of these responsibilities as a council member and even as a concerned citizen, helping people through both tenants and landlords through these type of conflicts and disagreements. And I can tell you that in really all cases that I've experienced, we're dealing with a group of people that are strong advocates for themselves. And so I don't think it's unfortunately, the group that is unlikely to call a 311 or to call an MTO is really the vulnerable group that I think this, you know, committee is concerned about. But unfortunately, they're probably not making the call at all, right? And the landlord could be threatening that they'll go after their voucher, which is something that happens. And I've heard a landlord say that to me, or I'll get your voucher taken away, for example, if you don't do this and that. So, but I just want to remind this group that this is a group that is more than willing and able to advocate for themselves. And because of that, I think we will see the type of participation that we're looking for. And if anything, they'll appreciate it. You know, I put together a Google Doc the other day on our property standards, kind of issues and concerns. And I shared it with people that have had similar issues with landlords or tenants or whatever, and got some really good participation in it from Fifth Ward residents. So I think this is a group that wants to provide their feedback, that wants the city to understand their experience. So I think we'll be surprised with the level of participation we get from the group. And then Councilmember Newsma, I think I was thinking Zen City as well, but not necessarily but more so to analyze the feedback that's in narrative form, because I do think, you know, it's beneficial to have the yes/no questions, but also whether it's done through a phone call, or someone is able to kind of text back their experience. Something that I've noticed that Zen City is able to do is to take things that are said on social media and kind of synthesize it for us. And then we get these reports on, okay, this many people, you know, are opposed to this issue or favorite, or here are some of the frequently used words or phrases, whatever it is that we found. And so I think Zen City would be a really good tool, again, not for every part of what we're trying to do, but specifically to evaluate anything that we have in narrative form.
Yeah, I think we absolutely should use that tool, because there's no additional cost for us to set it up to do that keyword search on this particular issue. But they do have some additional extra functionality where they could do a more scientific survey rather than just polling social media. So they might be a good partner for a survey. Maybe not.
We can look into that and see if I think, with our.
I want to
we're
move
running it.
us along because it's going to be close to adjourning time pretty soon. Joanne, excuse me.
Yeah, I was just wondering, can 311 ask the people, would you be willing to be contacted in a month, in 30 days or something, to give us feedback on your services, with MTO, and ask them right off the bat? and lock that into a database somewhere. Plus it's not easy to build a good survey. So, you need expertise in that.
I think it's an option for 311. I personally am less concerned with people that contact MTOs through 311 because they're contacting the city, and so there's less of an issue with the city contacting them back. The issue really comes from somebody contacting MTO and not necessarily understanding that the city is funding them for this service, and then suddenly getting a text or a phone call from the city. I know I've used the services of MTO in the past, and I would have been concerned because at the time I didn't know the city was funding it, that suddenly the city was calling me wondering what happened or what I did wrong or something like that. So when we're talking about people contacting MTOs for 311, I think there is a lot less risk of that.
And Joanne, I think you were saying that if they were asked, could they be followed up with and get yes, then it would give us, and that's something we can discuss, I think, as a possibility. Thank you.
One last comment maybe from Lauren, and then we could ask for a volunteer or two to work with Sarah and staff on this. So Lauren, go ahead. Are you muted?
We can talk about this later, but I would be curious to know, I mean, how does 311 collect feedback on its services? Because if so, this seems like an easy process to embed in that. Like if they're already reaching out to 311, why not just,
311 has a end of ticket survey, but it's only through their online ticket request. And they shared with us that they have an extremely low response rate on those. So currently there is some system, but the vast majority of the ticket requests they get for MTO and for tenant rights services is through the phone and not through the online service request. The other part as well, which I should mention, is that the 311 service poll at the end of the request is specifically around 311 services and not about MTO services. So there's that layer as well.
It's 2 layers, yeah.
Well, Lauren, can I be so bold as to ask if you would like to be part of this committee?
yeah.
I gotta take that other slot. As the
And then
person.
I know Councilmember it's
All
got-
right, I'll do it with you, Council. Yeah, I'll do it.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you.
Okay, well, thank you. So
And from a staff standpoint, it'll be Marion probably, because she's much more knowledgeable.
great. Well, thank you. We look forward to an update at our next meeting then. So we do have one more item, and we also need to be, if there are people waiting to make public comment, we need to allow time for that. So the third item on our agenda was we're creating a small landlord task force, and Ugo has volunteered to, I believe, chair that subcommittee, or certainly be on it anyway. And so the question for you all was, does anyone else on the committee want to be part of this small landlord subcommittee? And Lauren, oh boy, another.
Yeah.
I mean, because the other one I'm on is very short, right? Councilmember Burns and I it'll be like 3 weeks, right?
You'll be finished in no time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Councilmember Reed. Oh, go ahead. Councilmember Reed, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just volunteering myself to be a part of that subcommittee. Well, yeah, all right, thank you.
And then I know all of us can help by, if you know of small landlords that we should be reaching out to as part of this task force effort, whether we're going to have focus groups or surveys or whatever we're going to do to try to reach them. So if you have small landlord contacts, send them on to Sarah. Yep. Okay.
Yes.
You have a hand up?
Perhaps it'd be a good idea for, I'm sorry.
You go ahead.
Sorry, Kathy. Just wanted to ask Sarah if she could clarify what small landlord categories have been used in the past, so we have a clarity of what are we talking about.
And I should have brought my last time packet. What we're looking at what
Let me see if
we
I can find
looked at with kind of three categories, or certainly two, like up to 4 units, and then between 4 and 10, and then I think it was above 10. These were the ones that we were using when we were looking at trying to make sure we were reaching our smallest landlords with our very limited CDBG-CV funding for rent assistance. And so, and I think that's something we can discuss to see if there's any better configuration, but that's at least one that we had worked on. And I remember Councilmember Robin Ruth Simmons was very, was very involved in setting that, and had very, worked with us on the 4 and under, up to 4, and then beyond that, because she saw distinct differences based on her experience in her ward, and also as a landlord herself. So, but we can look at all that stuff in the sub-working group. Mm-hmm.
Kathy, you have your hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of my question as well, which was how do we define small landlord? And although I don't work at CIC anymore, I know when I did work there, I mean, we mostly focused on commercial landlords, so 5 and up, but I would still consider a 10-unit building a small landlord, unless they own multiple 10-unit buildings or whatever, just because they're not dealing with the economies of scale on everything that these larger landlords are.
Good point. And we weren't thinking so much by building, but actually by total.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we want a local, we have to discuss, like, is it like, do you have to have all your units in Evanston or what? I mean, I think that's something we'd like committee input on, or working group input on.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Councilmember Burns.
No, I was just trying to understand if this is something that we'd have to, is the 2-person thing doesn't apply, right? Anybody can.
No, it does apply. It always applies.
Are we talking about even with the subcommittee for small landlords? Are we looking to restrict that to only 2 members?
Oh.
Well, I mean, I think one of the thoughts when we started talking about working groups is we were thinking that in some cases we might pull people who are not necessarily on the committee, but we are really stretched with having too many more open meetings issues. It is a major time commitment.
Councilmember Reed, you can have the spot with Hugo. It's fine. Yeah, it's fine. No, it's fine. I'm going to do the other thing. And it's not an area of expertise. I was more curious to learn. So I'm happy to not do it. You can have it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councilmember Burns, and then we need to move on to public comment.
No, that was it.
Oh, okay. Okay, all right. So Marion, who do we have in the waiting room for public comment?
Yes, we have Sue Lowback that signed up for public comment, and I believe Tina, who is Tina Payton, also just raised her hand. So we have 2 public comment. Sue, I will be unmuting you so you can provide your public comment. I believe you had a question regarding the earlier presentation.
Yeah, hi, Sue Lowback here from Connections for the Homeless. I just wanted to say that, with the CNT proposal, it looks like such a cool plan. But one of the things it does is really highlight that tension between improving homes and maintaining affordability, creating energy efficiency, and doing these kinds of improvements without moving towards gentrification and so on. And I appreciate that CNT had a lot of comments, a lot of suggestions about how to remedy that. But as we see so often, it's sort of a list of things we could do without actually being a plan. And so I'm curious, I don't know if we have anybody from CNT. I would be curious to know how those different suggestions have been implemented in other communities, if we've seen them to be effective. And then I would also really love to see, if this is put in place, to have it somehow be integrated with our affordable housing planning, because this sort of preservation of affordable housing needs to happen at the same time that we're improving the housing. And there is a really difficult tension between those two things. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an important point. And then Tina?
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. Okay, I had a few questions and a few comments. I'm not opposed to Councilmember Burns, if you hear me, working on the landlord committee, but it would be nice to have maybe Lauren and Ugo to work on it. I think we need more people understanding the housing market, what happens between landlords and tenants. I think a lot of people are unaware, and this usually becomes a one-sided conversation and only helping the tenants, or this is now, COVID did something really crazy with housing. And now it's a nationwide problem. We already had a problem with affordable housing before COVID. Now you're going to have a bigger problem after COVID, because a lot of damage has been done to landlords that are unnoticed by maybe some of you, but in the general public does not understand that the small landlord was hurt very much. We had a lot of tenants that didn't pay. We don't get any support. We don't get any programs. I don't qualify for, I've been told for many years, and many of you've seen me on meetings for years and years and years. Our family has provided affordable housing for over 50 years here in Evanston, and we get looked over all the time. And everyone thinks we have all this money and we can pay for all these things. How can we pay for anything if we don't even get help? We don't get paid. We have tenants that are there and it's not paying, and it's very hard for us too. And we're a business. We didn't come into this wanting to buy property just to lose money. I'm very, it's very hard time for me also. And I think that everybody thinks the landlord has deep pockets, and I try very hard, and my family for a long time has provided affordable housing. And it says all over the country that we should be providing free rent. It's outrageous. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to support my family with someone getting free rent? So you need to talk to the landlord. And also was a comment earlier by Kara, and I forgot, I think someone asked, oh, maybe it was Lauren, asked about providing slumlords with funding. But the city knows who the slumlord is. You know from who you go and give a violation to, and their properties has rats and roaches. That is not my house, but I still get thrown under the bus. And according to some of your regulations, I'm not considered a small landlord, even though over 50% of my units are rented to Section 8 or Connections for the Homeless or Trilogy or Catholic Charities. And my rent is 30% AMI, not 50% AMI, which is inclusionary housing. And I have big giant taxes, and it's hard for me to pay. And all of my units mostly are affordable and below what you all know is affordable housing. Mine is truly affordable housing, and I still don't get help. So I hope that all of your conversations for these programs and so forth, that you will know that landlords like me are out here and trying to do the right thing. And you need to talk to us, not just MTO. I've never even dealt with them. My tenants, if they have some kind of problem, they just go to the agency or go directly to the city and bash me. And the city or the agency never comes to talk to me to find out what happened. It's always about the tenant and what we should do to help the tenant. Well, you can't help the tenant if you don't help the landlord. And there's very few landlords like me. The building right across the street from me, the Reserve, so for $65 million, and 1717 Ridge sold for $71 million just a couple of months ago. Do you think they're going to take some of these people on the program? No, you're going to have less and less and less affordable housing if you don't help the ones that are helping you now. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you, Tina. Kathy, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention for the benefit of landlords like Tina, that it might be helpful to understand, or maybe Sarah knows more about this, the new property tax abatement or reduction for affordable housing.
That's only for class 9 housing, doesn't apply to us.
There's a new
thing.
There's a new, it literally just took effect this year. It's similar to class 9, but it's somewhat different. I'm not an expert in it. But maybe at some point, just for our education, to have somebody talk about it, just because I think it would be beneficial to get the word out that this is available.
I believe, Kathy, the program you're talking about is a modification of the class 9, but it still requires buildings have to have at least 7 units to be eligible. I saw another thing that I'm trying to investigate, which I'd never seen before, which was a thing about Fritz Kage's office wanting to actually have people apply and let them know if they have income restricted units. And they were going to try to assess based on the income. And I've got to find out more about that. I've been asking Mitzi Gibbs, who is our person who is our assessment fighter. She's the one, if she's heard anything about that. Normally, Larry Suffredin's office has been very, very aggressive about trying to get out in front of changes in tax policy, and I haven't heard anything from them, and she's going to contact them. So I want to make sure that we don't try to do something that we don't know a whole lot about if somebody else who knows more about it is going to do it, because one of my fears is screwing it up and not getting it, that's not going to help people. But there is tax change going on, and I think that I've been trying to keep up with the one that is sort of like class 9, because it is, if you have 20% of your units at 60% of area median, you can qualify for a multi-year tax credit. And it's kind of complicated, but it can really provide a financial benefit. But again, that one is still, as I understand it, 7 units or more in a building.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
So Sue, the previous speaker from Connection, she sent me that, and it still does require class 9, not necessarily for the whole building, but for portion of it.
Mm-hmm.
That also requires that you remodel your building with 2 major repairs, such as a roof, and you have to redo all your units, and you still have to register as a Class 9. You have to also pay a lot of money out in order to get the credit. So to me, that would only be beneficial for a new developer, or let's say that someone bought a building, and that would be very beneficial to someone who would be just purchasing the building and would get tax credit. And they could also, let's say if they were in the TIF, then they could really benefit from that, because they would get 50% build out money for the TIF, and they could get the tax credit and apply for Class 9. But that is something, I read it carefully, and it was something that would not apply to me. And also Section 8, the Housing Authority of Cook County, they give a tax credit, but only for certain areas in Evanston. Only one of my buildings qualify for that. That's in South Evanston. Most of my affordable housing, which is in West Evanston, does not qualify for that tax credit. So they're very slow, and you know, this is just very painful.
Thanks, Tina.
Lauren, you have another comment?
Yeah, and at the risk of sounding corny, I just want to say, Tina, that I appreciate you sharing your perspective. I did make the comment about slumlords, and I think it does reveal a bias on my part. And serving 30% AMI is certainly challenging, and I have a lot of respect for that. So you're giving me some really good food for thought, and I hope that doesn't sound just like a platitude. I just wanted you to know I heard what you had to say, and I appreciate it. And I'll definitely do some reading up and research.
Well, I thank you. I wish that more people would become aware of our problem. And it's a problem for the tenant too, because of course, I work very hard. My buildings, apartments, their apartments look better than my house. I've spent a lot of time, my family, for many years, and we want people to strive and have a nice, safe place. I have a monthly extermination. I don't have rats and roaches at my building. And it's very important for me to provide this housing, but I will not survive myself if I can't get help, because there's an average rent now for a studio is anywhere between $1,800 and $2,000. And I'm renting my apartment 2-bedroom for less than that, a heated unit. And this is all over the place. This is E2, the Reserve, all of the buildings that are within blocks from where I'm renting, their rents are like $500 or $1,000 higher than mine. And so their taxes, their building is going to make my taxes go out of this world. And what am I supposed to do? I can't keep taking this rent and then no help to fix up the place. It's really going to be damaging for the affordable housing. You're going to just have less and less, because the big investment companies are coming in, and you all need to study REITs if you don't already know about it. The real estate investment trust that is very, very big, and they're coming in and they're buying up small landlords like me, and they're going to take over, and you're going to have very, very few affordable units. It's on the market right now.
Well, lots of food for thought for us and work ahead. So with that, I think I believe we've come to the end of our agenda, and our next meeting is March 15th. So we'll have updates on all of this and more. And I guess we have a caper.
We'll have the caper. Yes, the closing of the caper public comment period. How exciting.
Okay, all right. So thank you all for a robust discussion this evening, and I look forward to seeing you on March 15th.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you and good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night, everyone.